Hello, everybody. Welcome back into MLS Digest. I'm Camille, your host, and we're here to preview Week 13 of MLS action. And it's one of the first midweek slates of the season in the beginning of what is becoming a really congested schedule in May, with teams having this midweek on Wednesday, May 14th, and then a whole slate this coming weekend, and then U.S. Open Cup next midweek, and then I think another midweek slate a couple weeks down the line. So we're really getting into the thick of it, and that means squad rotations. And we're going to have to keep you updated on all of that. And these games are going to be tricky to manage just from expectations because of who might be in and out, and then also just general wear and tear for all of these teams. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into everything you need to know for Week 13. So only 13 games on Wednesday's midweek slate, 4 teams off, and the first one of those is DC United hosting NYC. It's 12th versus 10th in the East. DC United losing to Toronto last time out after a couple of wins in their previous 3, and then NYCFC giving Montreal its first win of the season over the weekend with a 1-0 loss, and they also lost 1-0 in Open Cup the midweek before that. So technically it's back-to-back losses in all competitions for NYC. And they travel to DC here. Obviously both these teams and all teams are going to be on shorter rest. And DC United also played Open Cup in that midweek. So you're going to see a little bit of rotation. I feel like DC at the moment, due to injuries with some other kind of attacking options and just who they played in Open Cup and all that, I feel like their midfield depth is really going to be tested here. And as for NYCFC, they're dealing with Burke Risa being injured, one of their main center backs, and just not in the right flow of things at the moment, right? They just don't have this consistent attacking spark. I don't really think their patterns of play are very convincing. And we see that. I mean, they're sitting 10th in the East, and I think that's pretty much as high as they're going to go, really, is one of those play-in spots, or really sneaking into 7th, unless they have a really good summer transfer window. And that can change everything for a team like this that is just, missing that star power at the moment. But this game is looking to be really rained out. This entire DC, Virginia area at the moment is going to be and will be dealing with pretty heavy rain in the build-up to this game and on game day. And I just don't see goals between these teams anyways because of the midweek situation. And it just seems like one where it's going to be nasty. They share the points, and I'm going to go with a 1-1 draw. Next up, Montreal hosts the Crew. Montreal still sitting in last place in the East despite the fact that they finally won their first game at NYCFC. And the Crew coming back in the final minutes to tie at the Union. They're sitting in second in the East, tied on points with rival Cincy, who they'll be playing in the coming weekend after this as part of Rivalry weekend. And we have to think, are they looking ahead to that match, trying to preserve themselves? Montreal obviously didn't have a midweek game last week. They're a Canadian team, so they didn't play in U.S. Open Cup. But the Crew as well weren't one of those MLS teams that were involved in Open Cup either. And so neither of these teams has that extra game behind them. And so you can still maybe field a pretty strong lineup from both sides. But for Montreal, it's going to be Bryce Duke and Campbell remaining out still, with a couple other guys who have really been kind of out of the fold for a couple weeks here now anyways. So nothing too new to talk about on their end. But for the Crew, it's just about that depth being tested. They just played a really good team in the Union traveling. They have to travel here again on shorter rest. And then they also have that look-ahead game in the Hell is Real derby. So will they be preserving their energy? How much, what will they come out with? It's about the approach. And Montreal at home has been pretty good by the metrics. Even though all their results haven't been great, they've been kind of tight games. And they really haven't been giving up too much defensively. And the fact that these two teams already met kind of makes me think that this can be another tight game, because Montreal made it really tough for the Crew in a 2-1 Crew win in Columbus a while back, and their pressing was there, and I just feel like adjustments will be made, and it might just be even more difficult of an environment for the Crew to really thrive in. And I think there's goals in this one either way, because of the fact that I still think they'll field pretty strong lineups, and Montreal just seems to be waking up a little from contributing on their side of things. But I think it's going to be tough for the Crew. I don't really want to, trust them in this spot here specifically, but I think it's going to be something like a 1-1 or a 2-1 Crew win. That's what I'll go with, a 2-1 Crew win. But I wouldn't be surprised if Montreal comes out of here with a pretty scrappy point. Moving on to another Eastern Conference matchup, it's Orlando City hosting Charlotte. And we saw this as a playoff series last year where Orlando eventually came out on top. Orlando sitting in 8th, Charlotte in 6th. Orlando played out to an amazing 3-3 draw against New England, a really fun one. Meanwhile, Charlotte is in the midst of a really long road trip right now, losing back-to-back games in MLS play as well as played at North Carolina in Open Cup play the past midweek. So it's now going to be their 4th technically game on the road in a row before they go back home and for the weekend. And I'm targeting the Charlotte team. We know that who they are still. They're not showing us anything different and proving us wrong about the fact that they are simply not an elite team in this league until they can get results against just even average opposition on the road. And it's now a loss against the Crew, a loss against Nashville. Their defense really just doesn't hold up to it. And the fact that they also used more of their, main squad in that Open Cup game as well than Orlando did in its Open Cup win. And the fact that Orlando gets to remain home in this one after their game against New England. So Charlotte has to continue traveling, and that's where I'm going with for the first best bet. Orlando money line -125. Atuesta as well is training ahead of this match, so that's a great reason to believe in a better offensive spark. Maybe even if he doesn't start, this team still is a little bit healthier. Araujo has been playing, a handful of games now almost since his own injury that he was kind of also out with Atuesta at the same time. But I think this is a good price for a home team midweek. I'm probably not going to be targeting a lot of, totals midweek. If I do, it's going to be unders, which is one of the plays as part of the show. But I think home teams in the middle of the week are usually a better, bet, and especially against the Charlotte team with all these factors in play, and potentially a far more rotated lineup than what I expect Orlando to put out there. And also the fact that they get to stay here technically in the state of Florida ahead of their rivalry match against Miami on the weekend. I mean, I don't think they need to really preserve too much ahead of that with everything here in mind. So I think this is a good price, and Orlando should continue to get the better of Charlotte. It's a cross-conference matchup as the Union hosts the Galaxy. The Union, of course, unbeaten in their last 4. They were coming off 3 wins, but then almost got that 4th in a row against the Crew before a late equalizer, but still sitting 3rd in the East. They've been very, very consistent, even without Gazdag now for 5 weeks it is now, against the Galaxy, who remain dead last in the West. Now with Montreal winning, they're the only team left without a win, and the defending champs are have the worst start through this amount of games in MLS history. It's just absolutely, there's really no words at this point. And after a 7-0 loss to the Red Bulls, I don't know, what their mindset is. They're the hungriest team, of course, for a win in this league at the moment, but that doesn't really amount to much because this lineup and this roster really is just so disjointed. And I guess even more disjointed with Cerrillo now being suspended for this one, and Peck could be returning for this one. That was the expectation, but haven't really seen any updates personally about that. And regardless, I think this Union team is just, far too superior. They get to remain home on this short rest. Yes, they did play Open Cup and went to extra time in Open Cup, while also using a decent amount of players in that. Meanwhile, the Galaxy didn't have that Open Cup game and aren't in Open Cup at all, so they have that little bit of extra rest, but at the same time they're also traveling and just played at Red Bulls and have to go here. So, and they also have El Tráfico to look ahead of to this coming weekend, and so there's just so much going on with the Galaxy that it's hard to trust them in any game at the moment. You want to continue to fade them and just pile it on because it seems like it's never going to stop, right? But the Union should roll here. But at the same time, my main concern with them is that Andre Blake is out. He's been out for a couple games now. The replacements look pretty decent, I will say, but also the midfield with that Open Cup game could have some moments of fatigue and all that, and that could create some opportunities for LA. But it's just not something I'm loving on either side. Philadelphia should roll, but yeah, nothing too convincing for me to take anything. But I still think the Union win. I'm gonna say 2 or 3-0. Toronto hosts Cincinnati. It's basically one of the East's worst teams by the standings against the East best, and Toronto beat DC United last time out 2-0. Cincinnati got back to winning ways against Austin with Evander just pulling the strings, getting a goal and an assist. And I'm going with the under 2.5 for our second best bet here, -110 odds. It's going to be played in Toronto. And this is kind of just this situation for this midweek, right? Most of these, especially the East's top teams, like the Crew, Cincy, Philly, they're all playing pretty bad teams by the numbers, by the standings. And this time Cincinnati's on the road. And they're going to be missing Miazga, it looks like, because he picked up an injury last game. But I still like this, back line regardless. And also Nwobodo is back in the mix, one of their kind of defensive midfielders. And should be on track to feature in some capacity here. And at the same time, Orejano hasn't been training the past couple of days, which makes me think that Cincinnati just as well could be just looking ahead to the Crew game on the weekend. And once again, these are kind of like these midweek trap games. And 5 out of 6 Toronto's home games have hit this under, and 3 out of 5 of Cincinnati's away games have hit this under. So not many goals to go around, especially in Toronto games in general. Both these teams, regardless, are pretty middle of the pack defensively by the numbers, and offensively they're actually even worse. Both kind of, Toronto definitely bottom 5, and Cincinnati kind of almost in that bottom third by XG. So while Evander has these moments, at the same time we're definitely going to see a little bit of rotation. Toronto at home especially, I think their defense can hold up their end of the bargain, make it really chippy as well. And really, I just don't see a shootout in this one. We just really haven't seen that from Toronto games a lot. Insigne, yes, he has been getting a little bit. He's finally maybe getting into form now after scoring a little bit. And Brynhildsen has been actually healthy for a couple of games, so I'm kind of positive about their outlook a little bit in the next couple of weeks or something like that. But in this spot here on this short rest, and Cincinnati's kind of look ahead to the Crew and kind of staying fresh for that, I think they will kind of be content with getting out of this one with just a pretty professional win. So I think Cincinnati wins this something like 1-0. But yeah, everything in my opinion points to this just being low scoring. Next up, the Dynamo host Minnesota, and I'm going with Minnesota on the draw no bet in this one, -105. Minnesota's second in the West. They just beat the brakes off of Miami back-to-back. Fantastic weeks of scoring outbursts away and home. And the Dynamo now with back-to-back losses to LAFC and Seattle, two other kind of, at the moment, mid-standings to upper standings in the West. And still, the Dynamo have just 2 wins on this season. Both, yes, have been at home against LAFC and against Austin. But we know what the Dynamo are. They're a slow possession team. They're very intricate about how they kind of build up in possession, but it's not very effective a lot of the time. And Minnesota, as we know, is at the moment, and probably will remain that way, the team with the least possession in the entire league. They just will give you the ball, and they're deadly on the counter, and they'll absolutely take what you give them in that regard. And so that's, there's no reason to think that's not how this plays out from a tactical perspective. And Houston on the other end isn't as sound defensively. They're also going to be missing 2 key players on that back line in Escobar and Aoufedesu. And also both these teams did play in Open Cup action, but Houston by far played a much stronger lineup and also went into extra time in that. So a lot of players got additional time that will, be more impactful in terms of how much wear and tear they have for this game. And Minnesota on the other end just really played kind of a C lineup in theirs. And so even though they are traveling here, and for the Open Cup they only traveled to Louisville before the Miami match, like I just don't see that impacting them too much. I think they can afford to not over rotate in this one, and I think you'll see still a pretty strong lineup out of them. And they also have the depth pieces needed now, including Gressel, to kind of eat up those minutes and still have a high quality play in this system that they like. So I think this is a kind of a gimme for one of the West's best teams. Maybe they're not second best or will remain second best in terms of the standings by the end of the year, but for sure contending for one of those top four spots. This tried and true system has worked against so many teams, and I just think the Dynamo will get completely outclassed. And this is a good kind of value bet to take for this midweek action. So I'm going to say Minnesota gets this one done 2-0. Nashville hosts the Red Bulls. It's 5th versus 7th in the East, and this is the matchup of the two teams that have scored 7 in a game this season. Nashville did that against the Fire 3 weeks back now, and the Red Bulls just did it against the Galaxy. But I'm not convinced on these Red Bulls still. I mean, I think that was more indicative of how bad the Galaxy are and just adding to their struggles in obviously an emphatic way. But that's, of course, something we all expect, I guess, or would like to see from the Red Bulls, because they haven't been this kind of team that runs the table in so long. And I just don't see that staying consistent. They also have the rivalry week game to look ahead of against NYC. They had to travel to Colorado for the Open Cup game, and maybe they played a C, B minus kind of lineup in that one in terms of their full strength, but I just think Nashville will get the better of them in this one. Nashville does get to stay home after overcoming Charlotte, and they've won all their last 3 at home. And I just think it's a good value play. I mean, for the midweek, Red Bulls having to travel. Nashville also didn't use really too many or many even of their big stars or main squad in their own Open Cup win. And so I think this is one that Nashville will continue to build the momentum off of. And once again, it's kind of like that Charlotte situation where we're taking Orlando. Like, these teams have to show it consistently. I'm not going to overreact to that one result, because honestly, not any other team, but many teams have been beating the Galaxy by pretty, insane score lines. Maybe not that crazy, 7-0, but for me, Nashville top 3 in terms of XG, top 7 in terms of XGA, and just I think they have more than enough to get past this Red Bulls team. They're a possession-based team, and they're actually very, very convincing with it. Meanwhile, Red Bulls, by the numbers, are just very, very lackluster, and 1 week isn't going to change my opinion of them. So with the odds we're getting as well, I think this trend of these home midweek favorites, some of them might get scrappy in terms of the totals. Like, these may not all be very high scoring fun games like we see on the weekends, but I think the home sides are mostly a best bet. Moving on, it's actually really the first rivalry game of this rivalry week, because basically every other one of those is on the weekend. I don't think there's any other true rivalry game in this midweek slate. But St. Louis taking on Kansas City in this one. As you can tell by the standings, neither of these teams has been consistent whatsoever this season, and St. Louis for sure is starving for a win and some attacking production. But I think they can get it done in this one. I think they'll get the better of their rivals. They already met earlier this season in KC. It was 2-0 for KC. That was, I think, the first game after Vermees got fired. So some additional kind of motivation in that one as well for KC. But for St. Louis, a lot of these guys have come back now. I think last game against San Diego, they were a little unlucky to not get some kind of result. San Diego really just took it late and was far more clinical. But I think there were signs from St. Louis that, they were actually creating. And you could see that by the numbers, the XG they put up. And Berkey might also be coming back. He was actually expected to make the team sheet or start for the game against San Diego. So I would expect him to actually potentially start in this one because he's been kind of good for some time now and training and all that. So that could be a big boost for this team. Not to say that the backup's actually been pretty decent in moments, but obviously Berkey's gonna get the start no matter what if he's actually fully fit. At the same time, even though St. Louis has had that Open Cup game behind them, meanwhile KC didn't. It's been part of what is now going to be a third straight home game, and this is kind of what they're putting all their eggs into one basket for. This is their rivalry game. They're not really going to be looking ahead to anything on the weekend, so I think this kind of match will take precedent for them. And KC had to travel to Portland, and it's now been back-to-back. Yes, they got the win against the Galaxy, but that was, like we've talked about, the first time a team's ever won without a shot on target. So technically, results aside, two absolutely horrid performances from Kansas City, and then a third one before that again on the road to Cincinnati. So when they're not playing the Earthquakes, then they're not going to look like world beaters. And so my guess here is that that depth kind of shines through for St. Louis in this one because the rotation will maybe kick in a little bit, of course, for both teams. But I think St. Louis now can actually activate Jean De Silva, Pompeu with a real start under his belt finally. He's had a couple, I think, but the most recent ones have been subs. So we can kind of assume, I think it's safe to say that we'll see these kinds of players, and I'm really excited to see what they bring. But I think there's still momentum despite the loss from that game against San Diego to build off of, and it's a solid spot for this St. Louis side in this environment that really has been starved of results from the team, but the environment will be rocking for sure in this rivalry game. So once again, it's another home team we're taking, but I like it in this situation. Next up, it's a cross-conference battle between the two teams that spent the most in the offseason, and both are, well, underperforming. One by a tremendous level, a completely embarrassing level for the money they spent. The other still kind of treading water at the moment, Austin being the one treading water. And Austin gets to stay home, but it's 3 losses in a row now. And just slipping without Danny Pereira. That's a key part of that midfield. They also have Dessler out, and the offense is just really starved for any moments. I mean, their only goal in this past 3 games of these losses has been a penalty. So while you could say they did good things to create the penalty, open play goals have not been their forte whatsoever this season. Meanwhile, Atlanta, goals have not been theirs either. I mean, as you can see, winless in their last 5, and the losses just keep piling on no matter what. And it just doesn't seem like this team is going to gel unless, some players get transferred out somehow. I don't know how this is going to work on their books, but they're going to have to do something over the summer. It seems like spend more money, obviously, but somehow have to swap some players in and out. I don't know if that's possible, but Atlanta continues its travel here. It's now 4 in the last 5 games that they're going to have to be on the road, and this is just one I completely don't want to even tune into. I just want to avoid it. Like, the stakes are even higher, I think, in this one because of the money they spent, how much they haven't really, performed up to standards or expectations, and neither is really, not even Austin is really looking like a true contender in its own conference right now. So it's a midweek game as well. Like, there's going to be rotation, and it's probably going to be a sloppy game, probably a low-scoring one. I think Austin probably gets a win here, but barely. They love their, 1-0s. But once again, I mean, literally anything can happen with these two teams. It's all about that first goal from an Austin perspective. And it's just one that I'm completely uninterested in, honestly. So I'm going to say Austin and Atlanta get a draw, though, 1-1. Here we have RSL taking on Portland, and two other sides of this Western table, completely different sides of it, facing each other. And for RSL, picking up a point on the road in Dallas with 10 men, impressive for sure. And the Timbers got back to winning ways at home against Kansas City with Santi Moreno's just wonder goal. And they do go on the road here on the short rest, but RSL, you could argue, is the real ones, that will be kind of hurting in terms of this situation, because they're coming off a 3-game road trip, 4 of the last 5 on the road as well. And the most recent one took them to Dallas, and now they have to return. And so even though this game is going to be in altitude, and of course that affects any team who's not used to it, such as Portland, I think that Portland will be just fine in this one, because RSL is going to be missing a bunch of players on this back line. Glad is suspended now. Vera is in concussion protocol, and he's certainly not going to clear that ahead of only like 2 days of rest, right, between last game and this game midweek. And then also you have another or one or two other of these depth center backs just not available. So they're only going to have, I think, one available center back in this one, which means they're going to have to tinker with that back line, and players will be kind of out of position, and some of their wing backs might have to play centrally, which will kind of affect how dangerous they are, because like Catranes is kind of one of their dangerous wing backs, and that just could affect how aggressive they are on attack. And I think they're just going to be the more tired team. Portland was the only one of these two with the prior midweek game in Open Cup, but also didn't really field too many, especially attacking starters, and even most of their back line. So even though this could be a look-ahead spot for the Timbers, since they have that Cascadia rivalry against the Sounders coming up on the weekend, I still think this isn't really too much travel for them. In the past, several games, even in their travels, it's been all West Coast, and these aren't like long trips, you know what I mean? So it's not really all that complicated on them, and there should be goals in them out of this one. I mean, RSL's back line is going to be makeshift. Diego Luna has really been at the center of everything for RSL. I mean, I say it like week after week, but I mean, he's really contributing on like, has to be at least 80% of their goals. And so while he's playing at an almost like MVP level, I think that the Timbers can definitely take advantage of what I think will be a much more tired RSL side, and that's where we're going with our final best bet, is the Timbers plus 0.5 or double chance. So they have to just at least draw or win. And yeah, I mean, it's not like RSL has been convincing at home either. I mean, last time out they lost to Toronto and were down from like minute 10 and still couldn't do anything. And the Timbers defense has been pretty okay. I feel like neither has the best like defensive metrics. I think both are actually in like the bottom third, but I think that bodes well. I think even if this is a shootout, the Timbers will get their end of the bargain, and I don't see them, coming out of this game with a loss. I think they can at least get a draw on this one, or even steal the 3 points. I'm really not understanding the line at all on this one. I could certainly be wrong, of course, but I think this entire situation just points to, the Timbers kind of just showing their class against this RSL side. LAFC takes on Seattle. It's 6th versus 5th in the West, and both these teams have been in pretty good form recently, both unbeaten in their last 5 at the very least, and Seattle probably a bit of the hotter team because 4 wins in their last 5, and the depth has really been shining, as we talked about in the recap of Week 12. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. Musovski, a goal in all of his last 5 games, that ties his record mark even for a season in MLS, and he's just been completely on fire. And meanwhile, Bouanga has been in just as hot a form. And when these two teams met early on in the season, it was in the midst of both, I believe, playing in Champions Cup, and they had midweek games sprinkled in between their matchup, and so there was some rotation when they met, but Seattle still, I think it was like 5-1, beat the brakes off them, and I see this one being a little bit more cagier. Both have their primary, rivalry games, derbies to look forward to. LAFC will play El Galaxy and El Tráfico on the weekend, and then Seattle plays the Timbers. I'm sure both will still be, but this is kind of a rivalry in of itself in recent years, just because of the playoff matchups and all that. Sounders got the better of LAFC last season in the playoffs, but I think we're going to see a little bit of rotation here. The Sounders probably have a little bit better depth at the moment, because Pedro de la Vega and some other players kind of played limited minutes in the Dynamo win. So we could see players like that. But at the same time, Seattle has the best defense in the league by the numbers in terms of XGA. And then, LAFC isn't terrible. And we know how they're going to set up. Seattle's going to have a lot of the ball. LAFC is going to want to counter, and so on and so forth. It's just really about how much energy they have, how effective they are. But I see this one kind of just being a little bit more stale with these kind of look-ahead games and the rotation we might see. And especially with the fact that Ordaz started on the weekend, we might see Giroud, and we know how Giroud doesn't really fit this system, so it might get a little bit disjointed for LAFC when they get on their counters. And that's kind of what I'm worried about the most. So I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. Another one of Wednesday's very late night games is a Western game, of course, San Diego against the Rapids. San Diego now with back-to-back wins after a bit of a skid there with 3 losses in a row. And they really left it late against St. Louis to steal all 3 points. And Colorado as well now on the other end of things. After a bit of a unbeaten run, 2 back-to-back losses against 2 pretty lackluster teams when it comes to their opponent's defense. DC and San Jose, and especially at home against San Jose, to not score is pretty concerning. But that is kind of what the Rapids run the risk of, because they're a very counterattacking team, and at the moment I just am not sure they have the depth to be handling these types of games and this type of schedule without the required type of wing play. They lost Omir Fernandez to the Timbers in a cash trade or something like that, and I don't really see their other kind of players at the moment as kind of consistent enough. And I'm still waiting on Cudi Pietro, even though he's not really a winger. Mihailovic can maybe play out wide if he were to kind of get into that starting lineup eventually, because he's had back-to-back kind of like 25-minute sub appearances. So this might be too much to ask of him to get a start like already, but I think this team will take it up a notch once he is kind of actually a regular starter, which I expect of him to be because of the trade they made with DC for him. So, but San Diego is one of the biggest home favorites of this midweek slate, and I think it's for good reason. It just sets up against the Rapids' favor, where they've played these very possession-based teams like Seattle, like San Diego before, which they actually won against, but also against Vancouver. They just when they don't have the ball, and teams that play against them in possession are actually effective and direct and know what they're actually doing and on the same page, it usually doesn't work out well for them. But the caveat, like I just kind of mentioned, is that they did play San Diego at home and they won 3-2, but I think this is going to play out a little bit differently. The Rapids got out to an early lead in that one, and it didn't really allow San Diego to play their game. So I think going on the road here, San Diego is deservedly a pretty big favorite, but at the same time, I'm just not sure about their own depth at the moment and how they're going to be dealing with this kind of upcoming congested schedule. So I think we'll learn a lot more about these two teams in this one, but probably could be on the higher scoring end, but it's just one I'm kind of staying off altogether from like a betting perspective. But I think San Diego should probably get the revenge on the Rapids, and I'm going to call this one 3-1 for the expansion side. To close out Wednesday's slate, it's the 13th and final match, and it's another cross-conference matchup with the Quakes hosting Miami. And Messi has been traveling. Pretty much everyone has been traveling, but that doesn't really mean they are going to start, right? We've seen this time and time again where, the Quakes tickets are going to be insane prices, but, that doesn't guarantee a start. And I have this hunch, this kind of feeling that we're going to see either one of or all of Messi, Busquets, Alba not really come on until like the 60th minute, right? And so expect rotation from Miami. San Jose as well played Open Cup the week prior. It wasn't a really strong lineup anyways, but regardless, I expect a decently strong lineup from the Quakes. From Miami, I expect rotation because they just traveled to Minnesota. They are now traveling to the West Coast, which is really, really far. They also had to travel to Vancouver a couple weeks back in the Champions Cup tie. So this back and forth nature, and especially add on to the fact that they have a look-ahead game against Orlando on the weekend where they'll have to travel all the way back from the West Coast, is just, it's a lot. It's a lot no matter what the star quality is. And this might be one where they kind of coast by and kind of set up in a more defensive posture, and that might make it just a little bit less open than we'd probably love to see between these two teams, because the Quakes, of course, are the most open team in the league by the numbers with the XG and XGA marks. So I hope for a really good show, like just pure entertainment out of this one, but I think we've seen enough out of Miami to kind of not be too surprised if we don't see all the star power out there. Suarez already, missed last game, and it just might be kind of this rubber match, like just a little bit, this team that's trying to get by. And I'm sure that Miami will get a result out of this one, but if the Quakes bring a strong lineup and put on that effort, I think they're definitely the more rested team. And I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw. If you've made it all the way this far, I really appreciate your support. Thank you for watching this video. And as of week 14, this coming weekend, we're going to have to see about the content. I know I talked about, obviously, with all the schedule congestion, that would be more content for sure, but I'm in the midst of a bit of a tricky travel situation at the moment, and so I might not be able to record anything and have this same kind of setup at the moment for week 14. So be posted on Twitter for updates for that, guys. And in the meantime, enjoy the midweek slate. Best of luck on bets if you're tailing or not. And I'll see you guys when I see you in the next video.